my first time rising in this House in the 44th Parliament, I just want to take a moment and an opportunity to thank the people of Lambton-Kent-Middlesex for re-electing me back to this place on their behalf. It's a responsibility, it's an honour and a privilege that I don't take lightly, and I'm just really grateful for the Lambton-Kent-Middlesex for sending me back here. And Speaker, my re-election was made possible by everyone who supported my campaign, believed in me, and had my back and helped me through this journey. And with dedication and professionalism of my team and the passion and commitment of our volunteers, the generosity and sacrifice of our donors, and of course the love and support of family and friends, we were able to share our positive Conservative vision, and I'm grateful beyond words. I wouldn't be here without my amazing campaign team, so thank you to my campaign manager David Servinski, my official agent Doug Plummer, and the rest of my core team and staff without whom I wouldn't be here. Russ Kuykendall, Tony Wisniewski, Yvonne Hundy, Anna Marie Young, Todd Gerd, Sherry Davies, and Kim Heathcote, and the group of volunteers who canvass with me day in and day out: Archie Neutrogen, Mark Etienne, Jerry Rupke, Steve Stellingworth, Marius, Juliet, Hannah Kurjanowicz, Brandon McDougall, and my predecessor, Bev Shipley. And I'd also like to thank Julie, Angela, Holly, Candice, and Jennifer for always being there and for your steadfast support throughout my political journey. And the sign crew, they put up over 3,000 signs, and thank you for your hard work and dedication. A special thank you to my parents, Theo and Diane Rood, for their love and support, and to my dad for taking on the immense task of installing these signs and removing them and just being there for me throughout this. And to my brothers, Jeremy Rood, Steele Leacock, and my grandma, Helen Jamerzinski, thank you for your love and support. So thank you all. Now, we're going on to the bill that's before us. Speaker, it should come as no surprise when I say that Conservatives are the party of law and order, and we are the party that stands with victims of crime and their loved ones. We're the party that applies common sense and outcomes-based principles to protect innocent Canadians from violent criminals who would harm others. And we're the party that understands that it's criminals that are committing these crimes, not law-abiding firearms owners, hunters, anglers, hunters and sport shooters. And Liberals claim to be serious about getting tough on crime, but their hypocritical actions speak louder than words. Last February in the previous Parliament, the government introduced Bill C-22. The goal of this harmful legislation was to reduce the sentences for illegal gun smugglers and remove mandatory minimum sentences for many serious offences. And the bill died when the election was called, but here we are again with the same bill, but a different number. And just months before the Prime Minister called an unnecessary election in the middle of the pandemic, my Conservative colleague introduced a private member's bill which would have actually imposed tougher sentences for criminals who are caught smuggling or in possession of illegal guns, which is a larger problem. Now, Brian Sobey, who's the president of the National Police Federation, said policies like what the Liberals are advocating for may be politically popular but fail to address the root cause of gun violence. And I quote, "The narrative is that we need to restrict gun ownership because that will curtail crime, when really the evidence is that illegal gun trafficking leads to criminals owning guns, which leads to crimes with firearms," he said. "So really we need to look at the source of the problem," end quote. Crimes with guns is exactly what the government claims to want to stop, yet it voted against the bill that would have continued to and continues to fail to support legislation that would actually do just that. So does that sound like a government that is serious on tackling gun crime for the people of Lambton-Kent-Middlesex? Because it sounds kind of hypocritical to me. Bill C-22, back as C-5, but with the same purpose. This legislation is a revolving door for criminals. It does nothing to stop the crime. It does nothing, it does the exact opposite, in fact. It repeals penalties for crimes like weapons trafficking, reckless discharge of a firearm, discharge with intent to wound or endanger, and armed robbery. And it also removes conditional sentencing for heinous crimes like sexual assault, kidnapping, child abduction, human trafficking, vehicle theft, and arson. Now, Liberal elites in Ottawa don't care about your safety or the security of your loved ones, is what that tells me. Conservatives like myself will always fight against harmful legislation like C-5. Canadians don't want the justice system to be a constantly revolving door, Speaker. Common sense must prevail for all common good. And Speaker, I studied criminology in university, and I have friends who are corrections officers, probation, and parole officers, and I hear the same thing from them all the time. It's the same people revolving through the doors, committing the same crimes over and over again. And you know, if it's a provincial offense, which is 2 years less a day, they're just not getting the kinds of help that they would need if they were sent to a federal facility where they will have help for mental health and addictions problems, Speaker. And so, Speaker, the government has a role to play in ensuring Canadians, victims of crime, and their families can exist freely without fear and in our society. And in C-5, the Liberals are telling Canadians that these offenses are no big deal. So it's no big deal that someone could leave prison, steal a car, rob several businesses, assaulting the occupants with a weapon, and then attack a police officer on their way out. Apparently, the Liberal government thinks that scenario only deserves a slap on the wrist, not a guaranteed minimum punishment for a harmful crime or criminal behavior. In fact, what's proposed in this bill would allow someone who did all of the above the opportunity to not even spend a single day in jail. So again, as a Conservative, I have to stand here and attempt to bring common sense to a government that is clearly showing no indication that they have any sense left, common or not. In fact, some days it feels like the Liberals have removed the word common sense from the dictionary entirely. But at the end of the day, Bill C-5 gets soft on gun crime and gives great relief to criminals and offenders. It's missing any good reasons why this policy cares for, protects, or prevents repeat offences against victims of violent crime in Canada. It misses the mark on what should be targeted to stop crime and illegal guns. Speaker, let me quote Winnipeg Police Constable Rob Carver. Quote, "When we seize handguns, the handguns are always almost 100% in the possession of people who have no legal right to possess them. They're almost always stolen or illegally obtained," end quote. Again, it's not the law-abiding hunters, farmers, and sport shooters who are committing serious crimes. Now, let's look at the final part of this so-called landmark progressive legislation. Speaker, during an unprecedented national overdose crisis, we have a government that is actively trying to enable criminal proliferation of drug trafficking, importing and exporting, and production. Now, where's the sense in that? Speaker, I've heard from Lewis, who's a constituent in my riding of Lambton-Kent-Middlesex, who's asked me, and I quote, "Can we address the fact that known drug dealers are getting away with murder? We lost a grandchild," end quote. So, Speaker, what Canadians want and need is a compassionate approach to mental health and addictions recovery, and this is not found in C-5. In fact, no part of this bill even attempts to touch on the subject, and it's too busy enabling the pushers. The Centre for Addiction and Mental Health estimates that the economic burden of mental illness in Canada at $51 billion per year, including healthcare costs, lost productivity, and reductions in health-related quality of life. Addictions and mental health have costly and far-reaching impacts in our society and must be given proper attention in legislation to combat the crisis. When will the government put forward legislation to address this impact, instead of using a real crisis to score cheap political talking points at the cost of protecting Canadians? Speaker, the Prime Minister and Liberal members across the floor are all talk. They talk big, they make sweet-sounding promises to address serious concerns about gender-based violence, opioid addiction, systemic racism, and other forms of discrimination. And they make bold-faced claims to be helping Canadians, but then they offer nothing of use. So what I see, and what the constituents that I represent see when the Liberals grandstand, is hypocrisy. I see a soft on gun crime and soft on criminal drug enterprise bill before this House. Canadians know bills like C-5 are contrary to evidence, countless news stories, and the testimony of victims. It should be impossible to ignore the madness of the government's relentless attempts to gaslight Canadians otherwise. Canadians expect this government to stand up for the rule of law, to protect victims first, and to stand up for their rights. The government should be targeting violent criminals, sexual offenders, and criminal gangs, and ensuring that the criminal code protects Canadians. Any changes should be made in a well-informed manner which protects public safety. As legislators, we must represent and reflect the values of the average Canadian, and Canadians consider the crimes of C-5 relaxes measures against to be extremely serious. By reducing mandatory sentences for serious crimes, C-5 says elected representatives do not need to be accountable to the victims of these crimes. This is hypocrisy. The utter hypocrisy of this bill, and those who vote for it is staggering. To vote in favor of this bill signals a victory for violent criminals who commit some of the most heinous crimes against the most vulnerable victims in Canada. It comes at a cost to victims and their families, present and future, and to the dignity of our great nation. And Speaker, that's a fact I find unacceptable, and that's why I will be voting against this bill. Thank you.